Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fleet News Group podcast, your go-to source for expert insights, industry trends and conversations with leaders shaping the future of fleet, transport and mobility. I'm Mark Sybil and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our fourth season in 2025. Over the past 3 years, we've had the privilege of sitting down with key decision makers, innovators and thought leaders who are driving change across the industry. This podcast is an opportunity to hear their stories, challenges, and successes wherever you are, whether you're back in the office, on the road, or simply tuning in on the go. At Fleet News Group, we're committed to delivering relevant, insightful content, and this podcast is just one way we bring those stories to life. So, if you're passionate about the future of fleet and transport, or you're just a fleet nerd like me, stay with us as we dive into the conversations that matter the most. Today's guest is Tim Kynoch, Fleet Engineering and Strategy Manager at Ausgrid. Welcome, Tim. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. I've been a long-time reader of Fleet Auto News, so it's really exciting for me to be part of the podcast today.
Fantastic. We talked a little bit about voice warm-ups there, and I almost got Ausgrid wrong. I think the listeners might have picked up on my stutter there. It's a simple word, Ausgrid, but anyway, we'll hopefully I don't get it wrong. At one conference, I called the head of Tesla fleet Tesla all day. So yeah, sometimes things stick in your brain. But anyway, that's enough. Let's get into the question. Sorry, diverging a little bit. Well, let's start with Ausgrid because a lot of our listeners may not be familiar with who the business is. So if you can maybe tell us a little bit about Ausgrid and then the makeup of the fleet as well, because it's quite a diverse and complex fleet.
Sure. So Ausgrid is essentially the company that operates the poles and wires that bring electricity to your house. So there's always a separate company who generates the electricity. There's a couple of companies that move it from that power station to your door, and we're one of those. So we come in at this sort of medium stage where the edge of the city, and we distribute power all around the city and bring it to your house, your business, or ideally to your EV. So we've got a very complex fleet because we're engaged in really heavy construction when it comes to building poles and wires and substations. So it's about 2,250 vehicles at the moment and plant. Really heavy focus on light commercials. So about 1,000 of those are light commercials, either utes or vans. Have a mix of dual cabs. We have custom bodies. We have a bit of everything. We've got about 200 passengers and about 400 trucks, and those trucks are everything from a small flatbed to a large mobile crane. And then we've got another 600 or so plant of almost every type. We've got bobcats, we've got excavators, we have cranes, we have elevator platforms, scissor lifts, trailers, a little bit of everything. And that's a really interesting fleet to manage because there's so much variation to it. And particularly, when I came in, was a really diverse number of makes and models. We had over 110, I think. So trying to standardize that has been a big challenge. And just managing all that bespoke equipment is quite tricky, but it makes for a really interesting day.
Yeah, wow, that's what I call a real fleet, I guess. Just managing passenger vehicles is quite boring compared to the fleet you described, I would gather.
I moved to Ausgrid from a purely passenger fleet at GoGet. I was in private rental, and that was quite simple. I'd forgotten the challenges of off-road driving, of range management, the really heavy equipment as well. So it's nice to have that challenge again. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, excellent. And we're going to talk about electric vehicles today, but you just mentioned standardization there in the model lineup. That's traditionally a fleet management fundamental, and we maybe lost that during COVID with supply disruptions and everything like that. So maybe just quickly, how important is standardizing the fleet to managing the fleet and eliminating, I suppose, processes, eliminating suppliers, eliminating, just work really, isn't it? Is that the purpose of standardizing the fleet?
Absolutely. And particularly for a construction fleet, training is such a big, meaty part of my role. We have to have a really robust system to make sure our staff are trained and qualified to use the equipment that we have. and training someone to use, a Hitachi versus a Kobelco versus, a Cat, they all come with their own quirks. The less of that you have, the less courses you have to manage. It's that onflow of work that you eliminate. And I didn't appreciate just how much training is a huge part of that. It's actually a fairly big part of my role. So, but also managing less parts, less variation, less suppliers to contact and deal with. As you said, COVID really disrupted that and made everything a lot harder. So we have gone a little bit the other way just to maintain supply, where we've brought a couple of new models in. But fundamentally, the minimum number is always the goal, just to reduce that extra burden in so many different areas of fleet management.
And just for the people that are new to fleet management out there and may have the operators pulling the walls over their eyes, just because they want the Cat doesn't mean they should get the Cat, right? It's a great brand, but if it's not fit for purpose, it's not fit for purpose. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Everybody has a brand preference. A lot of people will much prefer a Hilux over a BT50, or maybe a RAV over a Nero, but it's got to be what's best for the business while also fitting that role. And so I think a key part for every fleet manager is learning how to have those conversations and say, look, I understand that, for you, it's really important to have this particular make. However, this will be perfectly fine. And usually once they're in it and they use it and they're trained, if you've made the right decisions, that'll solve itself pretty quickly.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, just couldn't miss the opportunity to talk about fleet management fundamentals there, just to kick us off. You mentioned you came from GoGet, which is a passenger, car subscription, not car subscription. What's the word? How do they describe that business? Car share. Sorry, there's a word.
Share. That's spot on.
Yeah. So were you in fleet management before the GoGet role, or how did you find your way into fleet management?
So I came from the army, actually. I studied programming of all things, and then decided that wasn't for me, and I'd take a completely different tact and join the army. But I worked in logistics, so it was still very fleet centric, and it was just different fleets of equipment that we managed, whether it was normal stores, there was clothing, there was vehicles, and particularly working in that off-road kind of environment meant that I got a lot of driver training, I got a lot of heavy vehicle training, and as I sort of moved through different units, I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of equipment, which is a great foundation for a fleet manager. I got really good training in off-road driving and then became an instructor in that area. Did a lot of cross-country driving in heavy vehicles, a lot of convoy driving. I even managed boats for a year, had a small boat fleet, and spent some time in aviation as well. So I kind of got all the modes of transport. And that was a really good foundation to then transition into fleet management, because I already knew how to use everything. I'd maintained it. And whether it's vehicles or communications equipment or other sort of equipment that the Army has, it was all about what you had, maintaining it, new ones in, old ones out, this one's broken, this needs fixing. It's the fundamentals of fleet management in various levels of complexity. So I did that for about 10 years, and then I think they were going to send me to Townsville, which didn't really sound too appealing. So I decided it was time to bail. I took my long service leave and moved to GoGet as the head of fleet.
Yeah, wow, and some fantastic things at GoGet there. From a business that was started as a small kind of community sharing thing to I think almost certainly on the East Coast, there's a lot of it's a fairly big business now, isn't it?
Huge, absolutely, and a great success story for a small Australian business. And for me, it was a really good springboard into sort of private ownership, or I guess a private business role. And that gave me a really good foundation on the financial side that I hadn't had so much to do with, to then move to Ausgrid, which is a real combination of the financial management with some really big dollars, the complexity of a really heavy construction fleet, and that logistic requirement, which has really come to the fore when it comes to transitioning to EVs.
Yeah, excellent. Well, just quickly, can maybe explain the fleet management model that Ausgrid uses? Do you own them, lease them? Do you have workshops? Do you insource, outsource? Can you describe it for us in a couple of minutes?
Sure. We're a bit of a hybrid. So Ausgrid is a regulated business, which means we have a government entity that oversees what we do. And so that means we have a bit of a unique financial model, probably the most unique I've ever seen. So it's advantageous for us to own our vehicles outright, but we outsource some of the simpler functions. So our light vehicle maintenance is contracted out to an FMO along with fuel cards, tolls, and a few other services. Our heavy vehicle maintenance is all in-house in workshops, so we really prioritize the big and complex equipment. And we, with that owned model, we get to select the best suppliers. We make our own contracts and manage those ourselves. And we really focus on keeping the most critical roles in-house and the simple functions outsourced.
Yeah, wow. It's that's really good to hear because a lot of fleets struggle with the in-source, outsource, or lease or own question. But it can be a hybrid model, and as you've explained, the complexity of the heavy fleet and of plant and equipment makes a lot of sense to have that speciality or skill in-house. So yeah, that's interesting. So moving on to EVs, Ausgrid electricity distributor, the largest on the east coast of Australia. So it seems like a pretty obvious thing just to make everything electric. You've got the poles, you've got the wires, just plug it in. How important is the transition to EVs for Ausgrid?
It's right at the top of our key projects. Our CEO is always talking about how important this project is to Ausgrid because, we're the ones who are best positioned to roll out that charging and unlock that ability for particularly Sydney in the city to electrify, but also moving into the regions as much as possible. Right now we've got about 150 curbside chargers going in around inner Sydney, which is the easiest place for us to trial and make that work before we move further out. And we're supporting a lot of other energy projects with community batteries and the new renewable energy zones coming online. So there's a bit of a myth that the grid isn't prepared for mass EVs. I think a lot of people say, if we build too many, isn't the grid going to fall over? But that's what we're here for. So we're building capacity where it's needed. We're prioritizing projects to unlock that and putting the charges in ourselves. So as much as possible, we are right behind it.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear because there is a lot of press out there for suggesting that we're not ready. So I always say there's a lot of sort of people who a lot smarter than me and have these priorities that are working on it. And it sounds like the team at Ausgrid are doing that. They know it's coming and just getting ready for it.
A lot of engineers far smarter than I am are working on the charging component to unlock the city. But our fleet team is working on it too, and we're really pushing our own fleet electrification program as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So, what was the first electric vehicle that Ausgrid purchased?
Oh, good question. So, we started with two Renault Zoes. I think we bought them in 2018, and there's not too many Renaults in fleets. These were a sort of first generation EV. Range was about 200 kilometers. They had their quirks. They were a little tricky. I do recall one unhappy morning I was pushing one of the Zoes off the off ramp from a freeway to get it out of the way of all the traffic piling up behind me because it decided not to work. So,
Oh no.
yeah, that was, and look, that formed an early bias for me of, I'm really not sure about these, which wasn't great because they really weren't ready for mass introduction yet. So we did notice that they were sort of the last resort of cars to be booked out of the pool, but that sort of technology has increased and changed so rapidly that now our EVs are the first to be booked. So, and they're racking up K. So, not the best start, but we're really happy with what the technology is like nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know whether I've said this publicly, but I certainly talked to a lot of fleet managers about it. I want to meet the person who was working at Renault that sold those Zoes and also the Kangoos at the time. There was like a period where every local government bought a Kangoo and then these Zoes, they just got them. And whoever was doing those deals, unless they were giving them away, which I don't think they were, they must have been the best salesperson because they really did a fantastic job in getting them in the market. But yeah, obviously they were a bit early for their time as well. So what EVs does Ausgrid operate now? You've got past the Zoe experiment? You know, as you mentioned, you've got them in your pool fleet. Do you have cars, trucks, and plants? Is it a mix at this stage?
We have a bit of everything at the moment. Focus is on passenger because they're the easy wins, right? There's a lot of options in the market. They're generally second and third generation now, so there's been time for that product to develop in a really solid piece of equipment. And so we're about 102 passenger vehicles, and that's a mix of Kia Niro and Hyundai Kona. We've got the sort of older Kona when they were still NCAP 5. The heavy vehicles, we've got 4. 3 of them are little 6.5-ton tippers, which have been really good. Surprisingly, EVs as a tipper work really well because you don't have that lag, particularly on hills. The EV engine, or motor I should say, pushes you really well with that instant torque and doesn't give you the lag that you get on other vehicles. We've got a flatbed as well, which is running around with cargo. And then we've got 5 vans that we're just running on trials at the moment. So we've got a few different fit outs, mainly for our sort of substation and underground roles. And we're building one as a like an event vehicle at the moment that'll be used for us to show with displays and product events.
Yeah. The plants, is there anything happening in the plant market? There seems to be a few more manufacturers bringing stuff out. Is that something you're looking at or experimenting with?
We had a really good trial actually on a live job with a small electric excavator, a little JCB. What we've seen is that anything EV in the plant side tends to be at the really small end of the scale. And we're looking for something a little bigger. So we operate in sort of 5-ton range. I think this was under 2. So it wasn't quite big enough for our crews, but they did note how good it was to operate on site. And it was a really strange sight because instead of having this excavator running with a really loud engine and everybody shouting at each other, everybody was actually really quiet because there was no noise to cover what anybody said. Everyone sort of just like whispering on site. Like it was really strange. It was a really odd job site because everyone was so sort of quiet.
Yeah.
But what a great aspect of the electrification process. If you're not yelling at each other, if we're working at night, if for that sort of environment, fantastic. So if we can see models increase in their size and their capacity, yeah, we'll definitely transition. The only electric plant we really have is forklifts, but I think everybody's got those. I don't think we can really claim to move the electric plant on that side.
I know some of the forklift manufacturers are changing their badging to sort of make them seem a bit cooler now, like they're EVs, even though they've always been EVs. But
yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And just on that electric plant, like I'm not in that world of construction, and I see the job sites all over the place. But like the fumes, like because most like we have sort of regulations about CO2 emissions and NOx and everything from cars, and but the rules are different. So eliminating those fumes of an idling stationary diesel engine, that would be another benefit, wouldn't it, for the employees on site?
Absolutely. If because you're always operating fairly close to that plant, yeah, you definitely have that issue. Even the same with just our sort of heavy trucks that run plant, like a crane or something. If they're sitting on site, they're always running to operate that equipment. So we're currently scoping up a electric elevated work platform, which looks feasible, looks quite doable. But that's still working through the design process. But if we can make that work, absolutely, we'll definitely be pushing those out.
Yeah, surely you can just plug it into the electricity and charge it while you're doing the job. I don't know nothing about electricity, but it looks simple from an outsider's point of view.
It always does. It's a little more complex than just plugging it in, but the voltages can get a bit tricky. But there's definitely options where we can charge while operating. Whether we're ready for that, it probably needs a little bit of work yet.
Yeah, so it sounds like the trucks and heavy vehicles and plant are a lot more complex than the electric vehicle. So you mentioned you've got quite a few passenger electric vehicles. So does the charging infrastructure, is that one of the barriers for heavy vehicles, or is it the product and the fit for purpose of the product? Is it a chicken or an egg, or it's just what the one is a bigger challenge than the other?
Uh, the way to say it might be you need to buy the chicken while it lays the egg, because you really
Okay.
need both at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, when we were planning how to roll it out, we started simple. We went with pool cars because we could work those on a dedicated slow charger per vehicle at 11 kilowatt, and that was fairly simple. Planning for the heavies, we had to look at, realistically, what's the battery size we need to charge to do that quickly and not have the truck sitting idle for long periods if we needed it. Took a bit of thought. For us, storm response is a really big responsibility, and we didn't want our fleet to be crippled by charging. So we made the conscious decision to install higher capacity chargers so that whatever heavy vehicle we had, and we future-proof for this, would be able to charge in an hour, maybe two tops, so that if we had to charge, we could have our crews come back to the depot. They could plug the vehicle in, have their fatigue break, have a meal, get back on the road once that was done, and they'd have a charge ready to go. So for the heavies, we've got a mix from 20 kilowatt chargers all the way up to 120 kilowatt, depending on the depot and the requirements. And that, I think, will put us in really good stead to support future operations as well.
Yeah, okay. So your charging plan or policy, is it a combination of on-site like you just described? Is there any at-home charging, or are you using public networks as well? Is it a mixture, or is it just one at this stage you're just working on-site charging?
We came up with a nice little tagline for this one. We call it the charging pyramid. So at the base, we want depot charging to be the most frequent type of charging. So pool cars will come back to the depot, heavy vehicles come back to the depot. That's the most logical spot for them. For staff that are constantly out to site on a daily basis, that's not always an option. So if possible, if we could find a pole on their street that we could put a charger in, we're not there yet, but that's an option for some staff. So as we roll out our curbside charging, great, we've got a staff member there. That's a really good option for them. They can be part of that curbside public charging program. We do have backup for public charging networks with a third-party provider as a sort of last resort, but that's a tricky one because it's really unproductive time. We want our staff moving, so if they're sitting in a public charger, that's not ideal use of the vehicle. And the fourth option, because we have substations everywhere, a lot of our staff are based in a substation maintenance role. We've got a couple of hundred. So they're really good candidates where we can have them on site charging in that substation in our own locations, where we can put another slow charger in, an AC charger, and just drip feed them during the day. We don't have to put in a huge amount of capacity, but we can still keep them moving. So we've got four options to keep people going.
All right. So you've had some challenges along the way. You mentioned the Zoe pushing it down the freeway. That's probably not the only one. So top three challenges you've experienced in the transition, how you've overcome them?
First one is definitely fleet manager bias. When the business pivoted to the EV strategy and we had to start putting that together, the first thing was my own experiences saying, oh, I'm not really sure about EVs. And I think a lot of fleet managers are still in that boat because I hadn't had the experience. And like everybody, I've seen the negative press of, oh, this car's charging off a generator, or this car's, broken down because it's got no charge. So there's a lot of press to say it doesn't work. What there isn't is much press to say, actually, EVs really work really well. You just got to learn more than anything, right? So for a fleet manager, it's getting past that bias of not sure about them, getting into that trial and learning. And then I realized actually they're really doable. And now my advice to fleet managers is get ahead of the curve, because this is the new normal, right? This is the new thing for fleet. And fleet's a bit of a dinosaur industry. There's not huge
Oh,
amounts of
don't say
innovation.
that. Oh,
I mean,
I feel it. I know what you're talking about, but yes,
yep.
It still hurts me when we say it.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I was one of the dinosaurs, right? So I'm in that boat. But I think we all have to understand that there's new technology coming, and this is here to stay. So the sooner we get behind it, the sooner we learn it. You get that sort of lingo. You start talking kilowatt and kilowatt hours instead of liters, and you understand what can and can't be done. There's so much opportunity for EVs to really work with a fleet if you pick the right use cases. I think a lot of fleet managers, go straight to, oh, but it won't work for this 1%er or even for their 50%er. And that's fine. Start at that 10, 20% case and then build from there. Start with your easy pool cars. Not a problem. They can be done. Then move to your more complex roles. But I think for me, that first challenge was get past my own bias and learn what needed to be done, learn what the difference in charging types were, learn how range is managed, and learn how to change my driving style to get comfortable with the fact that I don't have to have 100% battery. I don't have to charge all the time. When I first started driving an EV for work, I was probably charging every second day, and now I'm really charging maybe once a week, maybe twice, but I don't do enough Ks to really warrant it. And I still rarely go below 50% before I charge, which is also fine. I think it's just that habit. So that was challenge one. Challenge two is building the charging network. I think that's a really important key component to making an EV fleet work. For us, we had a lot of people that had lots of concern about not having enough range. They didn't want to drive to say drive from Sydney to Newcastle and then have to wait 8 hours to charge and drive back. So we put in fast charging, 60 kilowatt hour charger, 60 kilowatt charger will take less than an hour to fill a 60 kilowatt vehicle. And once we told people, well, by the time you're there, it might take you 40 minutes to charge, maybe a little less, they went, oh, okay. And all the concerns just went away. And that was a really key change. So all our depots have fast charging, either 20 or 60 kilowatt. That was a really big win for staff. And for fleet managers that aren't really sure what they need, a good installer can walk you through your options, what capacity you have, and do an assessment. As we were putting the charging in, we certainly came across some difficulty. We had some depots where we just had no capacity. So those need a fair bit of upgrading before we can put more EVs in. We had asbestos conduit. We had some really old electrical hardware. Like you name it, all those things come up. But it's really just problem solving, and no different to what we do with a fleet at any given basis. ADRs change and suddenly everybody has to scramble to fix something that's now changed, or fuel standards have come in, so we all have to figure out what are we going to do for our trucks. AdBlue is going to be more prevalent, so that comes up on a daily basis as it is. So for us, okay, well, we've got asbestos, let's do a project to get rid of the asbestos, or let's do a project to upgrade this, and that then had that flow on to unlock things. Our property team was part of that, and they were really helpful to upgrade things where needed, and we've been really successful overall.
Yeah, maybe if I can I just ask on the infrastructure, because this is a question that gets all the time. So you've got depots and people, that was pretty easy to work out, but did you use telematics to understand where the vehicles were parked or where the travel was? Was that part of the process?
Absolutely. One of the things in our early discussion on, whether how we're going to do staff charging, would we install them in people's homes? We looked at where they parked. So the data told us that most people park on the street, because why are you going to give your driveway up to the work vehicle? You're going to put that on the street, and your own car is going to be in the driveway. So it didn't make a lot of sense for us to install a charger for a work vehicle, in someone's garage or in someone's house, if they weren't going to park there. And we also looked at the kilometers traveled and broke that down per week, because really that weekly drive is what's going to dictate your charging requirement. If you're living out of suburbs, driving all the way into the city to do work in the CBD and back every day, okay, we're going to have a tricky time keeping you charged. But if you're driving into a substation and you're parking there all day and we've already got supply, great, you're a perfect candidate. So that logistic sort of analysis was really important to picking the roles that we would transition, and have been part of those trial unit selections as well.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I asked for 3 challenges. Have you got a third one there for me?
Yeah. Everybody thinks EVs catch on fire all the time, and that's just not the truth. So really getting the right information there is really important. We did some great sessions with EV FireSafe, which is an agency under Department of Defense, who have the stats, and that data doesn't lie. So when we were talking to people and that came up, we were able to say, well, there's only been 8 recorded EV fires in Australia, and that's it. And people went, oh, I thought it happened all the time. Actually, you're more likely to be driving on any given freeway on a weekly basis, and there'll be a combustion vehicle fire somewhere in Australia. So understanding how rare it is, and that there's also technology that can help you make better decisions to reduce that risk. So part of that learning piece for a fleet manager is learning battery types. An older style sort of NMC battery can be a higher fire risk. We're still talking very low numbers, but the new LFP technology doesn't have the same level of risk at all. So a good stat I like to pull out, the NMC battery goes to about 600 degrees if it is exposed. The LFP goes to 60. And that really drops your fire risk massively. And they're super rare anyway. The other thing is they don't catch while they're charging. It's usually more than anything, it's usually people hitting debris while they're driving that ruptures the battery and that causes a fire. As long as you're using approved equipment installed correctly and you have a really good system in place, you're not going to have that risk. So I think educating people on that fire risk has been a really key part of getting staff on board as well.
As fleet managers, we talked about this earlier, finding the right vehicle, understanding the site, dealing with suppliers to put the proper electrical charging infrastructure in, upgrading electrical switchboards. And so doing all those things right, which is what fleet managers do, the risk is virtually minimal compared to, the e-scooter at home that you might be, your teenage kid might be modifying to go that little bit of extra speed. That seems to be where a lot of the challenges are with fires and electric vehicles.
Absolutely. And the cheapest sort of smaller batteries tend to be much more of a risk.
Yeah. All right, excellent. All right, well, we're just about finished our time together. I might just ask, the last question about the roadmap to convert the entire Ausgrid fleet. You mentioned thousands of vehicles of all different asset categories there. Is this a 2-year journey, 5-year journey, 10-year journey? What's your roadmap for that?
Our current target is 900 vehicles by 2029, and that'll be pretty challenging to meet that target. That's going to require quite a lot of that mix to be electrified. So I'm not sure with the current technology we're ready for full electric, but there's definitely a lot of opportunity. I think if we get some more charging infrastructure in place, we get larger battery capacities, especially in that plant side of things, we can definitely do it. And that technology is rapidly evolving. It keeps getting better. So I think we'll get there, but it'll be well into 2030 somewhere.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's an important message for people to realise that they just need to have a plan. It's not going to happen overnight. They don't need to rush out and install hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of infrastructure because the plan might be 2 vehicles a year or 10 vehicles a year or something like that. So that's really great to hear that someone like Ausgrid, with the poles and wires under your control, is still planning past 2030. So that's great. All right, well, that's the wrap for this episode. Tim, as a couple of fleet nerds, we could probably keep talking all day, but we try and keep the episodes to about half an hour, and I think we've maybe just creeped over. So thank you for listening to our audience. If you found this discussion insightful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It really helps others find the show. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and pretty much everywhere else you'll find a podcast. You can stay up to date with the latest industry news by visiting any of the Fleet News Group websites: Fleet EV News, Fleet Auto News, and Fleet HV News. And we're actually launching a magazine in April, so look out for that. We have an annual magazine on Novated Leasing, but we're launching a magazine. Probably all things fleet is what I'm going to call it. We haven't quite worked out a title yet, but it's going to be everything fleet. We're going to have plant, cars, trucks, utes, vans, everything will be in the magazine. So look out for that. And also remember, we release two podcast episodes every month. So look out for this is our second one for February. We'll have another two coming in March. And there's 3 seasons worth of interviews and discussions, plenty of great conversations you can scroll back through and listen to. So until next time, drive safe and stay informed, and thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Fleet News Group podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet News Group. We're also on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Our website is fleetnewsgroup.com, where you can get all of our stories, videos and podcasts. Until next time, drive safely and take care.